I was adjusting my silk tie in the mirror of the VIP lounge, the quiet hum of the Silverline Heights air filtration system being the only sound in a world where silence cost $10,000 a night. I had just finished a chart for a tech mogul, my mind already drifting toward the vintage cognac waiting for me at home, when the screams began, sharp, piercing shrieks that shattered the curated peace of the hospital wing. Pushing through the heavy mahogany doors, I expected a medical emergency or a high-profile tantrum, but instead I froze as my heart hit the floor. Standing on the pristine marble, flanked by nurses in blue scrubs who looked like they were carved from ice, was a massive adult white tiger. The creature was a ghost of the jungle, 500 pounds of raw, white-striped power that made the high-end medical equipment look like fragile toys. The initial shock turned to a cold, paralyzing dread. This wasn't a common zoo escapee, but a legendary predator whose amber eyes burned with a terrifying intelligence. People scattered in a desperate panic. A wealthy donor fainted near the reception desk, and a nurse pressed herself against the wall, her hands clamped over her mouth to stifle a sob of pure terror. The tiger stood motionless, its head low, its heavy paws clicking softly on the polished stone as it turned its gaze toward me. Just as the heavy thud of tactical boots echoed from the far end of the hall, Billionaire Arthur Sterling's private security team arriving with rifles raised and laser sights dancing across the tiger's snowy fur, I did something that defied every survival instinct I possessed. I stepped forward into the line of fire, my hands raised high. "Don't shoot," I roared, my voice cracking the tension of the room. The senior officer hesitated, his finger white on the trigger, as I explained that years ago, before I had sold my soul to this elite institution, I had worked with predators in the wild. I looked at the beast and saw no blood on its muzzle, no hunger in its stance. There was only a desperate guttural chuff, a cry for help that vibrated in my very marrow. The tiger wasn't here to take a life. It was here because it had recognized that I was the only one in this building of glass and gold who knew how to save one. In the sterile, high-altitude world of Silverline Heights, the air didn't just smell like antiseptic, it smelled like old money and expensive perfume. Doc Julian Vane sat in his private office, a sanctuary of Italian leather and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of a city he rarely touched anymore. On his desk lay the golden scalpel, a custom-made surgical tool with a 24-karat gold-plated handle, a gift from a Middle Eastern prince, whose heart Julian had restarted the previous year. To the world, Julian was a savior. To himself, he was a high-functioning luxury commodity, a man who had successfully distilled the messy, bloody art of medicine into a transaction of prestige and silent wire transfer. He checked his watch, a timepiece that cost more than a family doctor's annual salary, and noted that he was exactly 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The heavy doors to his office hissed open and Arthur Sterling stepped in, bringing with him a coldness that even the building's advanced climate control couldn't mask. Sterling, the billionaire owner of the hospital, didn't walk so much as he occupied space, his eyes like two chips of flint reflecting no warmth. He didn't ask how the morning's rounds had gone. He didn't care about the patient's recovery. He cared about the optic. Sterling leaned against the mahogany desk, his presence a reminder that Julian's brilliance was effectively a line item on a corporate balance sheet. For Sterling, the hospital was not a house of healing, but a fortress of exclusivity where life was a privilege reserved for those who could afford the premium. "The senator is arriving at 5, Sterling said, his voice as sharp and thin as a razor blade. "I expect a flawless presentation, Julian. No talk of risks, only results. We aren't selling healthcare here. We are selling immortality." Julian nodded, the movement practiced and hollow. He had grown accustomed to this cold exchange, having long ago traded his passion for the underserved for a life where his only struggle was choosing which supercar to drive to the clinic. He was the hospital's crown jewel, an ethically compromised genius who had learned to look past the human soul to focus entirely on the biological mechanics of the elite. As Sterling left without a word of thanks, Julian picked up the gold scalpel, feeling its weight heavy, cold, and entirely disconnected from the heartbeat of the world outside his window. The tension in the lobby was a physical weight, thick enough to choke the breath from my lungs. The white tiger remained anchored in the center of the hall, its massive paws silent against the marble, its tail giving a single, rhythmic twitch that sent a fresh wave of panic through the nurses huddled behind the reception desk. Security's red laser dots danced nervously across the predator's snowy hide, but the beast didn't growl. It didn't even bared its teeth. Instead, it fixed its amber gaze on me with a terrifying, soulful focus that seemed to strip away my expensive suit and my layers of professional arrogance. Slowly, with a deliberate grace that commanded the room's silence, the tiger lowered its massive head. Its jaws opened, not to roar, but to release a small, crumpled object onto the floor. The sound of the object hitting the marble was tiny, a soft, wet thud, but it echoed louder than any gunshot. I took a hesitant step forward, ignoring the frantic whispers of the guards telling me to stay back. I looked down and felt the blood drain from my face. Lying there was a delicate, blood-stained silk ribbon, its deep emerald color instantly recognizable. It was the signature hair tie of Isabella Sterling, Arthur's 7-year-old daughter, who had been reported missing from the estate's private gardens only hours before. My hand trembled as I reached down to pick it up. The silk was damp with saliva and smeared with dark, drying crimson, but the fabric itself hadn't been shredded by teeth. It had been carried with a surgeon's precision. A realization hit me like a physical blow, shattering the cold logic I had cultivated for years. This wasn't a mindless animal that had wandered into a city. This was a messenger. The tiger let out a low, guttural chuff and began to back away toward the sliding glass doors, its eyes never leaving mine, beckoning me to follow. I looked at the ribbon, then at the beast, and finally at the security monitors showing the dark, storm-swept woods that bordered the hospital ground. In that moment, the golden scalpel in my pocket felt like a lead weight. I realized that the tiger hadn't come to St. Jude's to hunt the elite. It had come to find the only man capable of saving the life it was currently guarding in the shadows of the forest. The beast wasn't a monster. It was a guide, and it was the only hope Isabella had left. The heavy glass doors hissed open as Arthur Sterling marched into the lobby, his face a mask of purple rage that clashed with the pristine white of the hospital's interior. He didn't look at the blood-stained ribbon in my hand. He only saw the predator that had dared to breach his fortress. "Kill it," he screamed, his voice cracking with a frantic, ugly authority. "What are you waiting for? Shoot that monster before it tears this place apart." The security team, emboldened by their employer's command, tightened their grips on their tactical rifles, the red laser sights now converging on the tiger's broad chest, like a constellation of blood. The white tiger didn't flinch, but its eyes narrowed, sensing the sudden shift in the room's killing intent. I didn't think. I moved. I stepped directly into the path of the rifles. My body shielded the beast. "Stand down," I yelled, my voice ringing with a conviction I hadn't felt in a decade. Sterling pushed through his guards, his eyes bulging. "Julian, get out of the way. That thing is a killer. It probably has Isabella's blood on its paws right now." I held up the emerald silk ribbon, the fabric fluttering in the draft of the air conditioner. "Look at this, Arthur. The ribbon isn't torn. If this tiger wanted her dead, she'd be gone. It brought this here to find me. It's trying to lead us to her." Sterling's lip curled in a sneer of pure elitist disbelief. "You've lost your mind. You're a surgeon, not a shaman. Move or you're finished. At Silverline, I'll see to it that you never hold a scalpel in this city again." I looked at the man who had bought my soul one paycheck at a time. Then I looked back at the tiger. The animal let out a low, vibrating rumble that I felt in the soles of my feet, a sound of urgent animal grief. In that moment, the prestige, the golden scalpel and the luxury cars felt like ash. "Then consider me finished," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet calm. "Kill this tiger, and you kill the only witness who knows where your daughter is. I'm following him. If you want to save Isabella, you'll keep your dogs on a leash." Without waiting for a response, I turned my back on the rifles and the billionaire, stepping into the rain-slicked night behind the ghost of the jungle. The transition from the climate-controlled luxury of the hospital to the raw violence of the storm was instantaneous and jarring. Rain lashed against my skin like needles of ice as I stepped off the paved perimeter and into the dense, encroaching tree line of the Silverline Preserve. The white tiger was a pale, flickering specter ahead of me, its luminous fur the only thing keeping me from losing my way in the absolute blackness of the ravine of shadows. Every few yards the beast would pause, turning its massive head to ensure I was still there, its amber eyes glowing with an eerie guiding light amidst the downpour. I wasn't alone. A sharp splash of boots behind me revealed Sarah, a young trauma nurse, who had always possessed more heart than the hospital's payroll required. She was clutching a portable emergency kit to her chest, her blue scrubs already soaked through and clinging to her frame, her face pale but set with a grim determination. We didn't speak. The roar of the wind and the rhythmic thrum of the storm made conversation impossible. We moved through tangled briars and over slick moss-covered shale, the terrain becoming increasingly treacherous as the ground fell away into the deep gully that gave the ravine its name. The tiger moved with a terrifying fluid grace that we couldn't hope to match. It leaped over fallen timber and navigated narrow stone ledges, where one misplaced step would mean 100-foot plunge into the jagged rocks below. My expensive loafers were ruined, my hands were torn by thorns, and the golden scalpel in my pocket felt like a mocking reminder of the sheltered life I had led until tonight. As we descended deeper into the throat of the ravine, the air grew heavy with the scent of wet earth and something metallic, the unmistakable smell of blood. The tiger suddenly stopped, its body tensing into a rigid line of muscle, and let out a low, mournful vibration that seemed to pull us toward a dark opening beneath a shelf of granite. We had reached the heart of the shadows, and whatever lay inside was about to change the trajectory of my life forever. The granite overhang provided a meager shield against the torrential sky, creating a grotto of flickering shadows and damp heat. As Sarah and I crawled beneath the stone shelf, the beam of my medical penlight sliced through the darkness, and the breath hitched in my throat. There, nestled in a bed of crushed ferns and dry earth, was Isabella Sterling. She looked impossibly small, her pale skin stark against the dark mud, her eyes closed in a fitful, feverish sleep. But she wasn't alone. Coiled around her like a living blanket of muscle and fur was a second white tiger, a female, her breathing shallow and ragged. The sight was enough to make my medical mind stall. The tigress didn't lunge, she didn't even lift her head. Instead she let out a faint whistling wheeze that signaled a punctured lung or a deep thoracic trauma. My light panned down her side, revealing a jagged, festering wound near her shoulder that was weeping dark fluid onto the girl's designer coat. The irony was a physical weight in the air. The very creature Arthur Sterling wanted to exterminate was using the last of her body heat to keep his daughter from succumbing to hypothermia. The girl was tucked against the tigress's underbelly, her tiny hand buried in the white fur, moving rhythmically with the animal's labored pulse. Sarah knelt beside me, her hands already flying to the emergency kit. "Doctor." "The girl's leg," she whispered, pointing to Isabella's right ankle, which was twisted at an unnatural, sickening angle. It was a compound fracture, likely sustained during a fall into the ravine. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the girl's neck to check her carotid pulse. She was alive, but her skin was clammy, her heart racing against the onset of shock. As I moved, the male tiger, our guide, settled at the entrance of the cave, his massive body blocking the wind, his eyes fixed on me with a heavy, silent expectation. He had brought the golden scalpel to this den of misery not just for the billionaire's heiress, but for the mother of his cubs. I realized then that I wasn't just here to perform a rescue. I was here to arbitrate a life-or-death debt between two species who had both been failed by the man who signed my paychecks. The heavy thud of a helicopter's rotors began to drown out the rhythmic lashing of the rain, and moments later the ravine was flooded with the harsh, artificial glare of high-intensity searchlights. The sanctuary of the granite overhang was shattered as Arthur Sterling's private security team descended the slope like a mechanical swarm, their tactical gear glistening with moisture. Sterling himself followed, his face contorted with a mixture of frantic relief,
and a cold simmering violence. He saw his daughter huddled against the white fur of the tigress, and let out a strangled cry. But as his lead guard leveled a rifle at the wounded animal's head, I threw myself into the light, blocking the path of the bullet. "Lower the weapon," I screamed over the roar of the wind, my voice raw and desperate. Sterling pushed past a guard, his eyes wild. "Get Isabella away from that filth, Julian. It's a miracle it hasn't eaten her yet. Kill the beast and let's get out of this god-forsaken hole." I didn't move. I looked at the tigress, then back at the head of Sterling's security, a man named Miller, who was currently avoiding my gaze. I reached down and wiped a smear of black grime from the tigress's shoulder, exposing the entry wound. It wasn't a jagged tear from a fall or a bite from a rival predator. It was a perfectly circular, cauterized puncture. "She isn't filth, Arthur. She's a victim," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration that seemed to cut through the storm. I stood up, holding my blood-slicked hand toward Miller. "This is a .308 caliber wound, high velocity, long range. This animal was shot from a distance, hours before Isabella ever went missing." The silence that followed was more suffocating than the humidity of the cave. I looked at the expensive, customized rifles the security team carried, the same ones they used for varmint control on the edges of the Sterling estate. The truth settled into the mud like a lead weight. Sterling hadn't just been protecting his daughter. His men had been hunting for sport on the preserve, and they had shot the mother of the very creature now keeping his child alive. The billionaire's expression shifted from rage to a flicking momentary guilt, but it was quickly replaced by a callous corporate indifference. "It's just an animal, Julian, don't be dramatic." My men were clearing the perimeter for Isabella's safety. I looked at the male tiger standing at the cave's mouth, his amber eyes reflecting the searchlights, and then at the dying mother who had chosen mercy over revenge despite the lead in her shoulder. The sin of Silverline Heights wasn't just the elitism or the money. It was the fundamental belief that anything without a bank account was disposable. "She saved your daughter after your men tried to murder her," I said, the words tasting like "and now you're going to stand back and let me save her, or I swear Isabella won't be the only thing you lose tonight." The thunder became the rhythmic drumming of a war march as I knelt in the mud. The sterile world of Silverline Heights now a distant mocking memory. The searchlights from Sterling's helicopter cast long flickering shadows against the ravine walls, turning the granite overhang into a makeshift operating theater. Under the father tiger's watchful amber eye, I realized the golden scalpel was no longer a trophy of prestige, but the only bridge between two dying souls. Sarah worked with a silent, frantic efficiency, handing me the local anesthetic from the emergency kit, as the male tiger settled like a massive, snowy guardian at the cave's mouth, his presence a silent vow of either protection or execution. "I need to stabilize the girl first, but if I don't stop the tigress's internal bleeding, she won't last another 10 minutes, I shouted over the roar of the wind. Sarah nodded, her hands steady as she prepped the girl's shattered leg. I began with Isabella, my fingers moving with a precision that felt like clockwork, setting the compound fracture, and suturing the arterial nick that had been leaking her life into the dirt. As I worked, I could feel the hot, ragged breath of the mother tiger against my shoulder. She was fading, her pulse a thready, desperate flutter beneath her white fur. Then came the moment that would have turned my colleagues pale. I turned the blade from the billionaire's daughter to the predator that had saved her. With the father tiger watching every incision from just inches away, I began the grim task of extracting the .308 caliber slug from the tigress's shoulder. The mud and rain were my enemies, threatening to infect the very wounds I was trying to close. I used the silk ribbon Isabella had worn, the same emerald fabric that had brought me here, as a makeshift ligature to stem the flow of dark venous blood. It was a dance of life and death, one blade serving two different worlds. For a heartbeat the tigress stopped breathing, and the male tiger let out a low vibrating growl that rattled the surgical instruments in Sarah's hands. I didn't look up. I reached deep into the feline's thoracic cavity, my fingers finding the source of the hemorrhage, and clamping it with a force born of pure desperation. As the tigress took a sharp whistling breath, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. I had operated on princes and magnates, but as I looked at the girl and the beast resting together in the dirt, I knew this was the only time in my career I had truly been a healer. The storm had begun to lose its teeth, the torrential downpour fading into a soft ghostly mist that clung to the trees as the first grey light of dawn filtered into the ravine. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the steady, rhythmic breathing of the two patients. One human, one beast, resting in the shadows of the granite shelf. Isabella stirred first, her small frame shifting against the white fur of the tiger. As her eyes fluttered open, Arthur Sterling lunged forward, his face a mask of desperate relief, pushing past the guards to reach for his child. "Isabella, thank God," he choked out, his voice trembling with a rare, raw emotion. "I've got you. Those monsters won't hurt you anymore. My men are going to finish them now." But as Sterling reached down to pull her away, Isabella didn't reach back. Instead, she tightened her grip on the mother tiger's thick fur, her small hand burying itself deep in the snowy coat. "No, Daddy," she whispered, her voice weak but surprisingly clear in the morning air. "Don't hurt them. You don't understand." Sterling froze, his hands hovering in midair, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Isabella, you're in shock. That animal is a predator. It dragged you down here." The girl shook her head, tears welling in her eyes as she looked up at her father. "They didn't drag me. I fell, Daddy. I was hiding from the men with the loud guns." She pointed a trembling finger at Miller, the head of security, who suddenly found the muddy ground very interesting. "The guards, they were shooting at the tigers for fun. They saw me fall into the gully, but they heard the big tiger roar and they got scared. They ran away, Daddy. They left me in the dark with the wolves." A collective gasp escaped the circle of doctors and nurses. The shocking truth hung in the air like a poisonous fog. It wasn't the predators who had abandoned a helpless child. It was the private security paid millions to protect her. "The wolves came," Isabella continued, her voice shivering. "I could see their eyes in the bushes. I was so scared. But then she came." She looked down at the wounded tigress. "She chased them away. She laid on top of me to keep me warm all night even though she was bleeding. She stayed with me because her babies were gone, and I was all she had left." Sterling's face went from pale to a ghastly ashen gray. He turned to look at Miller, then at the male tiger standing silently at the cave's entrance, a creature that had traveled miles into a city of its enemies, not to hunt but to find the only man who could save the family that humans had tried to destroy. The billionaire, the man who believed he could buy or break anything in the world, looked down at his daughter and realized that his own arrogance had almost cost him her life. While the very beast he despised had offered her a mercy, his own species had forgotten. The doctors stood in stunned silence, realizing that the real monsters in the ravine weren't the ones with stripes and claws, but the ones with rifles and payrolls. The sun finally crested the ridge of the ravine, its pale gold light turning the mist into a shimmering veil. In the quiet clarity of the morning, the hierarchy of Silverline Heights felt like a fever dream that had finally broken. Arthur Sterling stood broken in the mud, a man whose billions couldn't buy back the respect in his daughter's eyes or the honor his men had discarded in the dark. As the medical transport teams arrived to carefully lift Isabella and the sedated tigress into separate carriers, Sterling approached me, his hand reaching for his checkbook in a reflexive gesture of habit. "Julian," he began, his voice raspy and stripped of its usual iron. "Whatever the cost, for the silence, for the surgery, for saving her, name your price. We'll build a new wing in your name. You'll be the highest paid chief of surgery in the country." I looked at the golden scalpel still clutched in my hand. It was stained with the blood of a predator and a child, its 24-karat finish dulled by the grit of the ravine. It no longer felt like a symbol of success. It felt like a shackle. I looked past Sterling to the male white tiger, who stood on a rocky outcrop above us. The beast gave one final resonant chuff, a sound of acknowledgement that bypassed the intellect and spoke directly to the soul before vanishing into the deep green of the preserve. In that moment, the weight of the Italian leather, the high-rise views and the hollow prestige of Silverline Heights simply evaporated. "I'm not coming back, Arthur," I said, the words feeling lighter than air as they left my lips. Sterling blinked, his mouth agape. "Don't be a fool. You have a contract. You have a life here." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the golden scalpel and dropped it into the mud at his feet. I had a career here, Arthur. But I lost my life a long time ago. I'm going back to where the heartbeat matters more than the bank account. I turned to Sarah, who was watching me with a look of dawning hope. Pack the essential kits from my office, Sarah. We're going to the old district. There's a clinic there that's been closed for 3 years because they couldn't afford a star surgeon. I think it's time it reopened. As I walked out of the ravine, leaving the billionaire and his disgraced guards behind, I didn't look back at the glass towers of the hospital on the hill. My hands were stained and my clothes were ruined. But for the first time in a decade, my touch was steady and my heart was... I had walked into the forest as a hired blade for the elite, but I was walking out as a healer. The white tiger had come to the hospital to find a doctor, and in the process, he had found the man I was always meant to. My new oath wasn't written on a parchment in a boardroom. It was etched in the memory of a predator's mercy and the warmth of a child's hand in white fur. The world of gold was gone, and the world of life had finally begun.